Hi guys, I'm Ryan Murphy here from Real Time, and I'm starting a new segment called Ryan T. Murphy's Guide to Movies. Now the T is just to differentiate me from the Glee guy, the American Crime Story guy. Very successful guy, very happy for him, but that's not me. So it's not just there to be pretentious. But at any rate, I'm coming to you from my webcam and low video quality from this non-decorated room in my house. But I figure, anything worth doing is worth doing badly because I've been wanting to do this for a long time. um, I always look at film reviews, and what I wanted to do what I want to do differently in terms of film reviews is take a more in-depth look at films, and look at structure. My real-time co-host Josh is always saying you're always going on about structure. Well, that's because it matters. So I sort of want to talk about that, but also I want to talk about how films could have been better. So the first thing I want to talk about structure is it goes ACB. Okay, I think my thing might be reversed, like the yeah. Anyway, goes ACB. Every time when a writer decides to tell a story, they are deciding to tell it. They are deciding to what they want from A and what they want from C. So when you decide to tell a story, you're saying you want to tell a story of how someone goes from here to here, and then the B is just the stuff in between and how that happens. Stories are all about conflict and conflict that brings about change. So you have to say to yourself the first thing when you're writing any kind of story is, I want to tell a story of someone going from here to here, and then the B is how they do so. Okay. Second thing is the three-act structure. Now, in terms of how you define act, I mean, Shakespeare plays, if you read a Shakespeare play, it'll always have like 5 acts, but, acts are just how you break up a film. And, most people talk about acts of a story as in threes. And I want to quote George Lucas here, who, when he was talking about the original Star Wars trilogy, said, uh, the the whole trilogy is basically representative of a three-act story. First act, you introduce all the characters. Second act, you put them in the worst possible situation where they can never get out of it. And the third act, they get out of it. And that's very true. And first of all, before I go any further, I want to say that a lot of what I have here, I've gotten from Blake Snyder's book, Save the Cat, the last book on screenwriting you'll ever need, which is a book I read in film school, appropriately enough, in screenwriting class. It's a great resource. Go out, get the book. Unfortunately, Blake Snyder has passed away now, but whoever's getting the money deserves it because it's a great resource to have. I am just going to give you the cliff notes here, though. Okay, so you have a three-act structure. First act is when you introduce the characters. You set everything up. What's going on with my hair? Okay, you set everything up in the first act. Okay, and then the second act is basically leads up to a point where, well, the first part of the second act is called what he calls the fun and games, or the promise of the premise. That's when, once you've set up the fact that we're in this adventure, we get to play around a little bit. We get to show you the stuff that's in the trailers. This is where most of the stuff in the trailers of an action movie comes in, right? But then something has to go wrong, and I think we're all familiar with the fact that 2/3 of the way through any movie, whether it's an action movie or a romantic comedy, 2/3 of the way through any movie, everything goes wrong, right? That's pretty basic. What's a little bit less realized is that actually there's usually something called a false victory, where everything really seems to be going absolutely right just before the big fall, right? That's something you might not have noticed before, but maybe now will. So basically there's like the fun games, and then there's you keep going a little further, and then you get to the false victory, and then you get to the darkest moment of the story, and then usually it's like right after the darkest moment that someone comes up with a huzzah. It's I call it the huzzah moment because he uses that word in the book. But yeah, that's when it's like we have the solution, and then you break into the third act when they start implementing the solution. Two really great examples of this. Probably the best example of this, honestly, is Independence Day. Independence Day literally takes place in 3 days, and those 3 days have title cards to tell you which act you're in. Right? July 2nd, July 1st, July 2nd, July 3rd, and July 4th. Okay? So the movie opens up with the title card says July 2nd. Okay? We're introduced to all the main characters. We have, we know what's going on in their lives, and then the aliens come down. Oh, are the aliens going to be good? Or are they going to be bad? Then the aliens blow up a city. Right? We know they're bad now. End of Act 1. Fade to black. Title card comes up July 3rd. Okay? Promise of the premise. We get to fight some aliens. We see Will Smith in his fighter jet, running around with aliens and killing one, and Then they're in Area 51 and all that sort of stuff. And then literally there's this moment of darkness. I don't know if there's a false victory, but there's this moment of darkness where the first lady dies, right? And there's this very sad moment when the president is in the hospital, and he's hugging his daughter, saying, "Mom's sleeping now," right? And then we fade out. It's a very solemn, quiet scene. We fade to black, and then July 4th. And then the first thing we see in July 4th is that Jeff Goldblum's character David has lost hope. He's trashing the room. He who's always been so pollution conscious is now like, let's maybe if we screw this planet up enough, they won't want it anymore. And that's like his darkest moment. That's like, and then literally in that conversation when he's having with his father, he goes, "What did you say?" Ah, genius. My dad, a genius. And he comes up with the virus, right? I think romantic comedies are also, there's always that thing that goes wrong in their relationship, right? That's probably like when in How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days is when they find out that they've been conning each other the whole time, that kind of thing. It's about 2/3 of the way through the movie. Another really great example is the last one I want to do before I actually move on to Iron Man. Yes, I will talk about that, is Avatar. Avatar is a really great example of the movement from the darkest hour to the huzzah, right? Is that darkest hour is definitely when the bad guys finally come in and decimate the whole alien village, right? And then they realize that Jake was working for them the whole time, and so they ostracize him and just have no one's happy. And then he's like, "What can I do? What can I do? I know what I'll do. I'll be the first to ride that thing. I'll be the one to ride it." And so he does, and that moment where he actually drops over it and it cuts to black, that's sort of the huzzah moment, really. And then he comes down, he's like, "Look, that's how I get back in your good graces." So that's also a good example of a plant and a payoff. It's just a typical screenwriting thing, just typical any kind of storytelling thing is where you foreshadow something with something and then you pay it off later. So that's just terminology that I'll be using over the course of these reviews. So let's talk about Iron Man, because I did want to start this off by talking about the Marvel movies. I'm a huge Marvel Studios fan. I think what they've done is extraordinary, and it's also very popular. If I was up here talking about Wim Wenders films, maybe I'd have less of a base. But talking about Marvel movies, there's a lot of people out there who are really big fans. So and there's a lot to talk about here. So let's talk about Iron Man first and foremost. Iron Man was the film that started Marvel off right because it just was so good. And I think what's good about it, I mean, obviously there's Robert Downey Jr., there's humor, but I think it's a somewhat unique structure, and it's just a fun movie. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the A and the C. Okay, what's the story that we want to tell? We want to tell about how Tony Stark goes from kind of being an irresponsible douchebag to still a douchebag, but he becomes a better person, and he becomes more responsible, and he realizes the people that are important to him in life. A misconception, I think, is that people think that he realizes it's wrong to sell weapons. I don't think that he ever actually comes to that realization. It's easy to say, "Oh, weapons selling bad," but like he points out in the first part of the movie, like, "Well, we need to supply our troops." That's a correct statement. Like he never goes back on that. He never reneges on that. But what ultimately he realizes in Afghanistan is that his weapons have fallen into the wrong hands, and what he says at the press conference is, "I have become part of a system that is comfortable with zero accountability. And so I am shutting down the weapons manufacturing arm of Stark Enterprises until such time that I am satisfied that we can do it better." And he comes up with Iron Man. He's like, "Well, I'll just wear it myself." And in fact, John, and I'm going off on a little bit of tangent here. I'll get back on track, but I want to do a little bit of a tangent about Rhodey here, because I think it was Jon Favreau who said that the scene in Iron Man where Tony goes to Rhodey and says, "I'm working on something big," and Rhodey sort of doesn't react well. He's like, "What you need is time to get your mind right." Sorry, Terrence Howard. That scene, Jon Favreau said, was actually Tony. He's building the armor and he's intending for Rhodey to wear it. He's intending for Rhodey to be his guy, to be Iron Man. And it's after that scene where Tony realizes that he should wear it himself, because Rhodey is sort of the man's man, and by the man I mean the man, working for the man. And Rhodey loves the man, and so Rhodey is not the best guy for this, because he's not going to wear it for himself. He'll turn it over to the authorities, and that's that's something that continues in Iron Man 2. But I think that actually, I'll say this here because I don't know when else in this whole series I'll get a chance to say it. But Rhodey's sort of plot line in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe is kind of about that, because that comes into fruition in Captain America Civil War, where he's the guy that trusts the system. He trusts the system. He trusts, General Ross. And it kind of almost comes full circle, I would say, in Infinity War when he tells General Ross to stick it, basically. But anyway, back to Iron Man. So we have the A and the C. I think it's more about how Tony Stark learns to be more responsible, and he learns to be a somewhat better person, and he learns to appreciate the people in his life. He realizes that he has this family, and this family are these three people, um, Rhodey, Pepper, and Obadiah. And then, of course, tragically, Obadiah actually turns out to be a bad guy, but he still got Rhodey and Pepper, and he, of course, realizes that he loves Pepper, and we don't see that fully played out, but he learns to appreciate the people in his life, right? And so that's played out in a really good way. That's the A and the C. Now the B, it makes for actually a very interestingly done movie. In that the three acts of this movie are almost movies in and of themselves. It's really noteworthy because as a superhero movie, he doesn't become Iron Man until an hour and a half into a 2 hour movie. I mean, people talk about it like, oh, Superman doesn't become Superman in the Superman movie until an hour into a 2.5 hour movie. Um, Batman and Batman Begins, Christopher Nolan said, is basically modeled on Superman the movie. So again, he doesn't become Batman until an hour into a 2.5 hour movie. Here, it's taking him, 3/4 of the movie. So it's really truly an origin story in that it's just about how he becomes Iron Man along the steps. I mean, you could argue that he's Iron Man once he breaks out of the prison because the armor he's wearing is based on the armor from the first appearance of Iron Man. But no, the first part of Iron Man, the first act is him breaking out of that cage or the cave. So it's very much almost a movie in and of itself. It's thrilling in and of itself. They hold you over until we see Iron Man, because we do get a big action sequence to end it, right? And I want to say there's the B, right? The middle part of how the plot is structured, but there's also the intricacies of the writing and stuff like music. So I'll talk about intricacies a lot more too. But the intricacies in this are really good. It's really good writing. The whole Yin-Sen thing, there's a plant and payoff, right? Where he says, yeah, I'll see my family when we leave here. And then he's like, my family's dead. I'm going to see them now. This was always the plan. Great stuff. Great writing. But it's honestly thrilling and well done, and exactly like the origin story in the comic book. It's like the pages are it's like literally adapting the exact pages, from Tales of Suspense. So everyone really liked that. Then he gets out. We get some more humor. Of course, Robert Downey Jr. is his humor, his what he does is the best part of the movie. I thought he deserved an Oscar nomination, and so he sort of tries to better himself by shutting down the weapon system, building the Iron Man armor, and really trying to appreciate Pepper more. And then of course we get the big moment where he decides to where he finally becomes Iron Man, and we get held over because it's an action movie, so we should have action beats to hold us over and entertain us along the way. And it's interesting to me that the biggest one we get along the way is him just putting on the silver armor and flying around. He's not shooting anybody, he's not fighting anybody, but I think that was enough to sort of tide over the action audience of the film, which is kind of interesting to me. But then he becomes Iron Man, and then he kicks ass. But what I really find interesting about this movie and why I think it's a unique structure is that the movie's kind of over at the end of the second act. I mean, the A and the C. He's made his journey. He's Iron Man. Yes, Pepper finds out about it, and then I guess she has to come to a peace with it. So I guess that's something that can be accomplished through the third act. But to me, it's always felt like the third act's kind of an add-on. It's a good add-on, and it's a necessary add-on. It's not really a movie. I mean, people would leave the audience like, what? They need to feel like they have that through those three acts and that climax. So they throw in, and Obadiah's a bad guy. And he's going to become Ironmonger, and you can fight him. It doesn't really have anything to do with your journey. It doesn't really have anything to do with what you've done up to this point. But you get to fight a bad guy, and then I guess that'll give us some extra time to have Pepper and him have some more time and have her come to a peace with him being Iron Man and all that. But it's just kind of fun. And I forgot to mention the scene where he becomes Iron Man. I have never understood the argument that Marvel Studios films don't have good scores. That score, when he becomes Iron Man, that is the best score. That is amazing. And there's video essays all over the internet about this, and I don't, whatever. To me, they've always had good scores. One video essay put it the right way when they said, the most aggravating thing about them is that they just don't maintain the scores. They don't maintain them throughout the series because they always get new composers. So the Iron Man theme did not carry over into Iron Man 2. That's what was frustrating. But Iron Man is one of the few soundtracks that not only do I own, but I can listen to the whole thing from beginning to end. Every track is very entertaining. But at any rate, we get into the climax of Iron Man. Yeah, he beats Obadiah. Now within this, there's intricacies, there's writing, and you could say that the third act where he defeats the bad guys is the false victory. And that or the end of the second act where he defeats the bad guys is the false victory. And then when Obadiah kind of paralyzes him and takes his chess piece out, that's like the darkest hour. It's not quite the same thing as like Avatar, where it has to do with the overall story, but yeah, there should always be a bleak moment 2/3 of the way through at least, right? But yeah, the whole chess piece thing is a really interesting plant and payoff because it's part of what makes the movie so good. I think an audience looks at a good plant and payoff and they go, oh, and that's actually sends off those bells in our brains that makes us kind of be thrilled that we're watching a good story, right? And they have a really good one here, but it's also kind of what leads to the biggest, maybe only flaw in the film, because I do love the film. And that is the chess piece. We have to have some way for there to be a dark moment, for there to be a bleak moment, but then for Tony to get out of it. What do we come up with? We come up with this plot device where Tony has a chess piece. He gets rid of it, right? And he gets a new one. And then Pepper saves the old one because that's Pepper and everything, and she's more sentimental than Tony. But then it actually has plot significance. Pepper's sentimentality actually saves Tony in the end because Obadiah takes the chess piece to power his own, and then Tony gets to use the old one, and that leads to a thrilling moment. Stuff like that, I don't even know how they come up with. That's the part of writing that really kind of that's the specifics of writing that where it gets really good, and where I just don't know how they do it. But that also leads to the biggest, maybe only flaw. Honestly, I love this film, and I think it really only has like one real significant flaw, and that is the ending. They have to have this again. It's a plot device. How do we make the audience worry for Tony Stark? How do we make it seem like he's not going to make it? And they have this thing where he's using the old power source, and so it's kind of futtering out. He got rid of it for a reason. And so it goes, 5% power, 4% power, 1% power, now running on reserves. And finally, he uses the arc reactor to defeat Obadiah. Obadiah falls in, and his chess piece gives out. Fade to black. How is he going to live? You'll hear a lot of people talk about a Deus Ex Machina. Deus Ex Machina comes from ancient Greek, and you can look it up on Wikipedia to learn the origin. I'm not going to get into it, but it means God from the machine. The idea is simply that the ancient Greek playwrights would write their characters into such corners that they couldn't really get them out of it. So some other thing comes out of nowhere and sort of saves the day. And so that term is used as a critique of films. If you ever hear someone say this film is a Deus Ex Machina, it's not a good thing. It means that you're robbed of drama because what actually ends up saving the day is an outside force that wasn't part of the story up till now and everything. I've always thought Raiders of the Lost Ark had the biggest Deus Ex Machina because it's literally God from the machine. But in this case, they don't even have a Deus Ex Machina. They don't even have one. They just say, oh. They literally just say, well, how Tony survived? No, he did. Cut to him being fine. How did he get the power source powered? But no, don't know. Now, what I said at the beginning of this was that I wasn't going to just criticize. I was going to try always to think of ways to diagnose and help make better, so that we can sort of imagine an alternate universe where there's a better version of this movie if Ryan T. Murphy had been, one of the producers. And to me, I get the problem of that scene, right? They wrote themselves into a corner. They wanted to have this plot device where it makes you work, but then they didn't know how to get out of it. To me, I thought of a solution. I always thought that it would be, you could have easily had Tony, before he defeats Obadiah, basically grab his chess piece and rip it out before he falls into the thing. Now, you still want to have that moment at the end where he's fading, and you hear Pepper calling his name as we fade to black, and you can still have that. He pulls out the chess piece, Obadiah falls in, but then his power has gone off. That he's actually passing out before he can even put the chess piece. So he's just literally laying back and he can't get it in time. And then we can have the same cut, truly have the same cut to him being fine, because I think the audience in that scenario can piece together that since we're hearing Pepper calling his name, that she's running to him, we can put enough together to know that off screen she found him and put the new chess piece in herself. And we get to have that same dramatic cut, but it doesn't suck now. And that's the only real negative piece of Iron Man. I really love Iron Man. I love Robert Downey Jr. in it. I love how it tells a good story. It introduces an awesome hero. It has a great score. It has that fun aspect to it. You look at the poster. The poster looks like the Rocketeer. It has that classic, sort of Spielbergian fun aspect to it. And I really dig the fact that it's kind of a unique structure in that they just sort of tell a story from A to C with the first two acts, and they're like, and then he fights Jeff Bridges. I've always thought that was kind of fun. So that's Iron Man for you. I'll be back with my review for Incredible Hulk, and I'll hopefully go down the line of all the Marvel movies. So thanks a lot, you guys.